prophesying, in a sense, foretelling what was going to happen to them. And then the mountain began to be still and be quiet. So the other thing, there's many historical bits about the mountain, but when we go there, there's generally a flat plain, and that's where the buses will pull in. And when we get off, we'll show you where the battlefield was. And basically, if you're looking at the big mountain, the Muslim forces were on the right side. They were camped on the right side, and the Kuffar of Quraysh that came were on the left side. And in the middle of that whole place, you'll see is where the battlefield was. And then there's still a graveyard of about 70 shuhada, 70 martyrs that died that day, in the middle there. So you can use that as a vantage point. And the most famous of which was Sayyidina Hamza radiallahu anhu, which was the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ. He was a beloved uncle to the Prophet ﷺ. And you should all know the story about how he was killed by Hind, who was the wife of Abu Sufyan, had ordered one of her slaves named Wahshi to assassinate Hamza, and it was very tragic what happened to him afterward. But there's a great hikmah in that. People, if you don't know the story, I'll just narrate very quickly, which is that Hind had this detested Hamza because Hamza was very powerful. He was a protector of the Prophet ﷺ. He was a fierce warrior in sort of Arabian society. He was a legend, and so she wanted him really dead. And so she had told Wahshi to kill him, and not only kill him, because the way of humiliating your enemy in battle in those days was to mutilate the body. And so what happened to Wahshi is that Wahshi then disemboweled him, and I'm making it graphic just so you understand the emotion that happened, that Wahshi disemboweled him and cut out his liver, and then Hind came after the battle and took his liver and bit into it. And so the Prophet, when he saw the body of Hamza radiallahu anhu after what had happened, he began to choke up. He began to cry when he saw him on the battlefield, because he had, as one of the believers from his community, but also as his beloved uncle, that was the response that he had. But despite that situation, and the point of the story at the end is this, that Hind ultimately became Muslim after the conquest of Mecca with Abu Sufyan, when the house of Abu Sufyan became Muslim. And the Prophet ﷺ sat with her and accepted her shahada. And it just shows you the magnanimity of the character of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, in that, knowing where people were coming from and then dealing with them where they were going. So that's something that we keep in mind as a lesson, one of the lessons of the Battle of Uhud. The other thing about the Battle of Uhud is the Prophet ﷺ was injured during the battle. His Mubarak face was hit, and it cut part of his cheek, and part of his tooth broke, and he began to bleed. And Imam Khalid mentioned this on our way in, which is that the Prophet ﷺ began to catch the drops of blood that were falling, because he didn't want the drops of blood to hit the ground. Because if they hit the ground, the adhab, the punishment of Allah, would descend upon these people, because they had done that to a prophet of Allah. And the Prophet and the Sahaba, because many of them, obviously in the moment of battle and the aftermath, they said, Ya Rasulullah, pray against these people, pray for their destruction. And the Prophet said to them, I was not sent to pray for the destruction of people. And then he made the dua to Allah, Allah forgive my people, for my people know not. And there's a great, beautiful hikmah in that, in how to deal with people as a leader, and also as, how the mu'mineen should be looking at their situation. During the end of that, in the course of the battle, many people know this, and we'll try to go to this. There's a hill that's called the Hill of the Archers. And the Prophet ﷺ had stationed 50 archers on this hill. And he instructed them, specifically, do not leave your position no matter what. But in the beginning of the battle was going in the favor of the Muslim forces. So that there was confusion, obviously, in the chaos of battle, as they say, and they saw that the enemy began to be routed. So that the Muslims were chasing the enemy off the battlefield. So some of the Sahaba left their position on the hill, and we'll go to the hill. Inshallah, we can climb up it, and you can see it, because it gives you a great vantage point of the entire battlefield. Some of them left that position. Because of that actually caused the tide to turn. Because Khalid ibn Walid, who at this time was not a Muslim, he was actually a brilliant cavalryman and general from the forces of the Quraysh. He saw an opening, so he basically flanked them, as we would say. So he came around the back of that hill from behind the Muslims with his cavalry and attacked them. It was at that point that the Prophet ﷺ got pinned down and he was hit. Then a rumor began to spread amongst the forces that the Prophet ﷺ was injured, and even na'udhu billah, that he had died. And some Muslims began to lose heart. And so the Prophet ﷺ was in the middle, and many Sahaba surrounded him as protection. And they say many great Sahaba that day, Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu, and others, young Sahaba, formed a human sort of circle around the Prophet ﷺ. And they said that we were jumping to catch the arrows that were being fired to stop them, to prevent them from hitting the Prophet ﷺ. And again, that just demonstrates really what courage and valor mean. That when you're protecting that which is beloved to you above all else. And one of the Sahaba later on to the Tabi'in, to his students, he lifted up his shirt and he had scars all over his back. And he said, these are the wounds that I got on the day of Uhud. And I wear this as was a mark of pride in a sense for them, in that's mujahada, that struggle, fi sabilillah, for the sake of Allah. The other thing is, when the Prophet ﷺ was injured, and he was in this circle, some of the Sahaba, for his protection, took him off of the battlefield. And at the base of the mountain, you can climb up. And you can climb up, and there's a little cave. I don't know if we're going to be able to go to the cave, so I don't want to get anyone's hopes up. But if you go to the cave, the Prophet ﷺ was taken to the cave, and the cave is very small. It's the size of a closet. Fits maybe 2-3 people in there at once. And the Sahaba took him there, and they wanted him to rest. And because the Prophet ﷺ was there, he was resting, he was bleeding, he was perspiring, that the scent that was left behind was the scent of the Prophet ﷺ's ittar. What we would say is his ittar. So to this day, if you walk into the cave, you can smell the scent of Rasulullah ﷺ. This is one of the mu'jizat that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has preserved for us. And alhamdulillah, many of us before, when we visited, we were able to witness it. And it's literally like you're standing out in the middle of, you're smelling the fresh air during the day, and then you walk into the cave and you're completely immersed by it, and it's discernible, is what I'm saying. And it's an amazing thing to see. It gives you an iman boost. It really can, irtifa, as they say in Arabic, your iman goes up when you're there. So generally, that's the brief history of the Mount of Uhud. And so the main thing that we're going there for is a reflection, to look at witnessing our history, witnessing the historical sites, and then going to make dua for the shuhada of Uhud. And there's a place demarcated there as a graveyard of the martyrs, and the most famous of which is obviously Sayyidina Hamza radiallahu anhu.